we're in a sermon series at the moment where it's about God asking us questions. And what an evocative idea that, our relationship with God, he does ask us these questions that cuts the heart, really, of who we're about and who he's about, and in a way, what life's all about. So I'm a bit of a Star Trek fan, all right? And and on the screen, that's a shot from a Star Trek film in the late 1990s called Star Trek Generations, if you want to check it out. Anyway, this Captain Picard on the left, and early on in the film, he receives devastating news. And at this stage in the film, we don't know what it is, but we find out later that there's been a fire on Earth, and his brother and his nephew have been killed in this fire. So that's sort of happened. And he speaks to this individual, and then this character on the right, he says to Captain Picard, he says some words. He says, "They say that time is the fire in which we burn." So that's a haunting, evocative line, expressing, like all great poetry, a deep human truth, that we're all decaying and we are aging and we will die. And humans have responded to this in all sorts of different ways in how we live our life. I know that in our culture in the West, there is denial, I think, about death, with the elevation and the idolatry of elevating youth, billion-pound industries of selling products and services to ward off death. And we look to find meaning in the shadow of this truth. Now, I know my kids, they watch Disney films, sure as you've all experienced. And what I've noticed about recent Disney films is this idea that it sort of puts out there that we need to find the truth within. The truth of life is within us somewhere. And if we can find that and self-actualize that in a crazy term, in terms of gaining control of our life and forging our destiny, that's where we find meaning. Other stories in our culture are a bit more cynical. So also in the 1990s, you probably tell when I grew up, these stories. A film came out called Trainspotting that was based on a book. And there are some very famous lines from the start of that film. And I'm going to say some of them now to you so you can get a flavour of what's going on. Choose life. Choose a job. Choose a career. Choose a big television. Choose washing machines, cars, compact disc players, electronic tin openers. Choose good health, low cholesterol, and dental insurance. Choose fixed interest mortgage repayments. Choose a starter home. Choose your friends. Choose a 3-piece suite on hire purchase in a range of fabrics. Choose DIY. I'm wondering who you are on a Sunday morning. Choose your future. Choose life. But why would I want to do a thing like that? I chose not to choose life. I chose something else. So the character in the film who said that, the story goes on, and this group of young men based in Glasgow in the 1980s reacted against the life that was set before them and ended up the dark world of drug addiction and destructive behaviors. And I think this film resonated with my generation because we were reacting against, I suppose, the materialism and the shallowness of the 1980s and our parents. And we were looking to find meaning, purpose, and a more authentic life. So today's question from God is all about life and death and the big questions we face as humans. The brutal reality of death and what is the purpose of life as a result. This part in John, this chapter, is all about this. So today, we're going to face this and listen to the question that Jesus asks Martha and is asking us all today. So I don't know if you recognize these individuals. So C.S. Lewis is the chap, and Joy is his wife in the photo. And she died a few years before him. And he wrote a book called A Grief Observed, which, incidentally, he didn't publish under his name because of how hard it was for him to write it. And it's about just the experience of grief with the loss of his wife. One thing he says in the book is anything more certain than that in all those vast times and spaces, if I were allowed to search them, I should nowhere find her face, her voice, her touch. She died, she is dead. Is the word so difficult to learn? So we experience this because of the brokenness of our world and ourselves, right back into Genesis chapter 1 to 3 territory, whereas we as humans take from the tree of knowing good and evil and look to define good and evil ourselves and not from God. So they and we are banished from access to the tree of life. This passage in John is the culmination of Jesus over the preceding chapters saying things about himself, using symbols and metaphors from the Old Testament. He describes himself as the bread of life, the light of the world, the good shepherd, and the water of life, using I am statements, purposefully putting us back into the story of the burning bush, where God described himself to Moses as I am who I am. In this part of John, this chapter, he goes one step further and claims a category for himself which dramatically ups the stakes and should shake us to the core if we're putting our faith in it. Now, in the story, Jesus had some dear friends, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. So I love maps, so I had to have one as a result. So this shows Bethany, where Mary and Martha live. It's a couple of miles from Jerusalem. And Lazarus, he's in the preceding verses to this, we find out that he's been sick. And his sisters, Mary and Martha, send a message to Jesus, who was in Jerusalem, asking him to come. But he delays slightly, and by the time he arrives, Lazarus has died. And Martha, as the eldest sister, goes out to meet him. Now, we've met Martha before in other gospel stories. Jesus affirmed in front of the male disciples, interestingly, that it was right for Mary, her sister, to sit at his feet and learn from him. Now, Martha clearly has been learning from Jesus because she says to him that he could have healed Lazarus if he'd got there, but now he's dead. And I wonder in that section what's going on in Martha's mind. Like, is she cross? Is she frustrated? And that can be the case in our grief. We can be cross, frustrated, disorientated. How do we see Jesus in those moments? But we see in verse 21 that Martha, in her grief, is aware of the mighty deeds that Jesus can do and his relationship with God the Father. She has faith and confidence in Jesus, even in her grief. But I don't really think at this stage she thought Jesus could do anything further for Lazarus. There then follows an interesting exchange I think we help to give a little bit of a backstory to. So this picture obviously is authentic and how the Jewish people looked at the time. So the Jewish faith in the time of Jesus was not uniform in its beliefs, its theologies. And there were a number of groups, you've probably heard of some, they were with Jesus as his disciples. Zealots, Pharisees, Essenes, Sadducees, and they had different views about what happened when someone died. And the Old Testament, the earlier parts of the Old Testament, are a bit hazy about this sort of thing. It describes a place called Sheol, a place where people go when they die, but don't really have bodies. It's a bit of a half-life, a bit gloomy. But death began to be seen as frustrating God's plan for his people and creation, and in particular God's love for his people. That compassionate love that's moved, as a mother is moved with the kind of child that she's bearing, it talks about in early parts of the Old Testament. Death severs us from relationship with God. So something needed to be done to get the project back on track. And the prophets talked about a new heaven and a new earth. Now the Sadducees up there, they didn't believe in the resurrection. But the Pharisees, who you may have heard of, they did believe in the resurrection, where people will be resurrected into new bodies in the new heavens and earth. So in verse 23, Jesus says to Martha that Lazarus will rise again. Now, naturally, Martha thought he was talking about this belief in the resurrection and the new heavens and the new earth. It's not surprising, because Jesus had elsewhere in gospel stories affirmed the truth of that final reality, where God will make all things new. So Martha's response, it is understandable. However, while Jesus was affirming the new heavens and earth, he meant more when he said Lazarus would rise, and now reveals an earth-shattering truth to Martha. Jesus did not say explicitly that he can provide resurrection, although it is implicit by what he's about to say. Instead, he said that he is the resurrection and the life. That he effectively is life and has authority over death itself. He's activating one of the deepest ideas in the Old Testament, that he is the creator, he is the source of all life in this existence. Then says to Martha, and he also addresses it to us, do you believe this? What a statement. How we believe this changes everything. So we see that Martha, her mind shifts in Revelation. In a way, this is the denouement of all the chapters leading to this part of John's Gospel, the final, greatest I am statement. If Jesus is the resurrection and life, then he must be the King, the Messiah, the Anointed One, the Son of God, the coming together of all the plot tensions that humans need to be rescued by the one true human, the embodiment of God in human form. So, what does Jesus do? What is the resurrection and life like? So we next see in the following verses what Jesus does. Facing down death and ultimately the human kingdoms which use death to destroy and oppress, Jesus takes risks and goes to places where his life is under threat. His disciples told him not to go to Bethany because people were threatening to stone him. But we see in the following verses, he goes to a tomb where a stone has been rolled across the entrance. He calls out in a loud voice. The stone is rolled away, and life emerges with grave clothes. Come now, friends. what's going on here, crying out in a loud voice, a tomb and stones been rolled away, mention of grave clothes, and Lazarus returning to life. This foreshadows what Jesus is going to do for all of us and has done. He is going to the place of his enemies, knowing he's going to his death, dying on a cross, or as Paul later says, a tree for us, being buried in a tomb and rising to life so that we all can now be in right relationship with God and, like Lazarus, be connected to life, the ultimate tree of life. So living a life in association with Jesus and acknowledging him as a true king over all kings, we participate in the confidence and power over death that Jesus had then and has now. We can hang on to this in the dark, brutal rawness of grief, and also when we think about our own life. Going back to Captain Picard. So in response to that line, at the end of the film, of time being the fire in which we burn, he says we should cherish each moment of life because they won't come again. Now, there's obviously truth in that, but Jesus challenges Captain Picard. Even though our bodies decay and age, we are enclosed by Jesus. And he releases us from the finality and grip of death, because beyond death is the undiscovered country of Jesus. And in the face of that, death loses its potency or its sting. To quote Paul, who was quoting Isaiah, "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory?" So this is not just for the new heavens and new earth, the end of time, or the beginning of the new time. This life broke into this world on Easter Day, which we're going to remember in a few weeks. Jesus can bring life into the here and now as a foretaste of what is to come. And perhaps you need to feel some of Jesus' life in your being today, to have some life brought to places that are dead, relationships, jadedness, sadness. Maybe you need some healing. And in embracing Jesus now and his life, we start to change. In the film Trainspotting, the characters trying to find meaning in the wrong places. And perhaps we do yearn for life in the wrong places too. Want the big TV, the career, the status. These things can be deathly, capturing our minds to find meaning and self-worth in the acquisitions of things. This is not the life that Jesus offers. It's upside down. Rejecting chasing status, rejection of finding security and self-sufficiency and money and things. It's radical. It's edgy. And I think we need to be challenged about this in our culture. So perhaps you don't know Jesus. This is a time where you can meet him, the true Lord, the tree of life, the Creator. This could be your time to be clothed in new life. Perhaps you do know Jesus, but you want to feel life afresh and have a new sense of the big story that you are part of. Jesus envelops you. Perhaps you need his life-giving touch. Or perhaps you're looking for life in the wrong places, looking to find meaning and confidence and purpose in the wrong things. You might want to ask Jesus to reveal areas of your life that he wants to transform and make anew. Or perhaps you feel simply lost and need to hide in the tree of life with Jesus. So to finish, I chose not to choose the life the world holds out for me. I chose the life that comes from the Creator. The life that comes as the still small voice in the storm. The life which is built on the solid rock foundation of the way of Jesus. choosing a life which is radical, challenging everything that I am. I chose to come down from that sycamore tree and be challenged about Jesus, about my resources. I chose to enter the bizarre world where all my learning, degrees and knowledge are turned upside down by Jesus saying, I must come to him like a child. So, choose life, choose Jesus, the great I am in this passage. But then find out it's not really about you choosing Jesus. It's more about Jesus and you choosing each other as you dance to a new melody that is pregnant with the new life to come, while his life resonates through your very bones and flesh into the now.